Thank you for tuning in to another episode of On Beat. I am Dave Kluge, and every single week I'll be talking to an NFL beat reporter to try to get you the scoop on your favorite team. Today I am joined with Zack Rosenblatt of the New York Giants. Zack, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Why don't you go ahead and let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you're doing right now as far as covering the team?
Yeah, well, I cover them for NJ.com, so you can find my stuff on NJ.com/Giants, and I'm on Twitter at Zack Blatt, ZACK. Yeah, and now it's just, they're kind of a mess, and they have all this COVID stuff, and so when the team's this bad at the end of the year, you kind of start thinking more about the next year, is how it goes.
Yeah, I'm sure you can see behind me. I got a Chicago
Yeah,
Bears helmet
so,
right here. Big Bears fan, so I'm kind of with you where it's like, all right, guess we're turning our sights
well,
to
and the Giants have their
2022.
pick, so they don't even have as much to look forward to.
Exactly. And you know what? That is a great thing that you just brought up. Let's go ahead and start with that, Zach. Given the Giants and Bears' current records, the Giants could end up with two top 10, maybe even two top 5 picks next year. Do you expect them to address any specific positions? I know they've got some salary cap constraints. So are they going to go after positions, or do you think they just kind of take the BPA best player available approach next year?
I mean, the BPA that in theory that's like the best idea, but they have such a clearly defined like top two needs, which are offensive line and pass rusher.
Yep.
And I think this is pretty good pass rusher draft. I think there's a few offensive linemen that are pretty highly rated. I wouldn't fault them if they pick two offensive linemen. Like that's how much of an upgrade they need on their offensive line. They have one guy that you can say is like a definite starter for next year, Andrew Thomas at left tackle. So they need those. They spent all this money in draft capital on like weapons, so they shouldn't be drafting those high again. So it really does come down to pass rushers and offensive linemen. Like that's the 100. Unless they have love a quarterback, would be the only other reason I would say to not do that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Daniel Jones in just a little bit and kind of what his future is. But yeah, those are the two things when I was looking through the roster, seeing what I've seen so far. Yeah, it wouldn't be crazy for them to take two offensive linemen. I don't know if I've ever seen that before, where a team
Yeah.
takes two linemen in the first round, but the Giants are in a position where it makes a lot of sense to do that. Let's also talk a little bit about the coaching and management staff before we get into some player discussions here. From what I've been reading, it seems like Gettleman is more on the hot seat than Joe Judge. Just kind of walk me through that because I don't know what it's like, in the day to day stuff and in the New York media. But if one were to get let go after the season, do you think it would be more likely that Gettleman goes and Joe Judge sticks around?
Yeah, I think so because I think the ownership really believes in Joe Judge. They like his personality, how like detail oriented he is, and the results haven't been there. And I think it's fair to question that. But Dave Gettleman's been the GM for 4 years. He's made some pretty terrible decisions that have put them in a bad spot. He had, I had memorized his record in the past, but it's pretty bad over the 4 years. I think they have the worst record in the NFL since he became the GM, or at least
Yeah.
close to. It's like them or the Jets, as always, with most bad things. But yeah, it's just like there's so many decisions, and to the point where he shouldn't have been kept around this long. I wouldn't be surprised if they announced it as like a retirement in air quotes. But yeah, it's time to move on from him. But then that brings up the question of if you want to have a GM on a different timeline than a coach, bringing in a GM when the coach is already there, which doesn't always work out. But they really do believe in Joe Judge, is why, and I don't think the owner wants to fire a coach two and done again. He fired Ben McAdoo and Pat Shermer after 2 years. And I don't think he likes how that looks. So I think Joe will get another year. If they're bad again next year, then he's gone for sure.
Yeah, and I'm kind of agreeing with what you say here. I really like Joe Judge. I like it. It seems like the players rally behind him. Like you said, very detail oriented. I think that he has a lot of really good attributes that you want to see in a head coach. So I'd like to see him get another shot. But yeah, it wouldn't shock me one bit to see Gettleman gone next year. As for the offensive coordinator, though, they obviously let go of Jason Garrett midseason. Do you think that they stick with Freddie Kitchens as a viable replacement, or do you think that they're going to go out and try to address that in the offseason as well?
It's a good question. It's hard to say. It's hard to even evaluate Freddie Kitchen just because he's had Daniel Jones for like one game, I believe,
Mhm.
since he took over. I think him and Joe have a great relationship. They think a lot of the same ways. I think Freddie's more willing to take some risks than Jason did. But sometimes I think he gets a little cute with some weird formations and stuff. But I think it's at least a possibility. I would hope that Joe explores like interviewing other people and bringing in some new faces. I wouldn't be surprised if they made a few changes on the offensive coaching staff just because of how bad their offense has been in the 2 years here. But it's just hard to say. I think they should go outside of the building and keep Freddie still involved, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was the offensive coordinator next year either.
I feel like there's almost a little bit of tension between the Bears and Giants because it seems like they are in such similar positions with such similar needs. The Bears are going to need to address their offensive coordinator next year as well. And I think Joe Brady right now is a guy that's going to be out there that is going to draw a lot of interest from teams like the Giants. I think that he just kind of was the scapegoat, if you will, for the Panthers. So, do you know if that's somebody that they might be interested in reaching out to?
I haven't heard anything like that though. I would say I think Matt Rule and Joe are similar in the way that they have their hands in like everything that goes on. And I don't know if Joe loved it. I don't know Joe Brady very well, but it seemed like Matt Rule played a pretty big hand in like the way they operated on offense, and he wanted them to run the ball a lot. Where I don't know if that's the way you win football games, and so I don't know if you might see Joe as like a similar animal, but I think they'll see that they need to adjust something on the offense. They need to change something, and I think bringing in a mind like that would be a good move, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure all eyes will be on that during the offseason and seeing what those change are. But let's go ahead and discuss some players. In this show, being on the 32-bit network, the majority of our fans are focused on fantasy football. So we're going to talk about some of the skill players, some of the offensive weapons here. And of course, let's start with Saquon Barkley. Next year is going to be the final year of his rookie contract. So there are a few routes that the Giants could take. They can extend him this offseason. They could use next year to kind of further evaluate him, which sounds kind of weird considering he's been on the team for 4 years now. Or they can just let him walk after the 2022 season. Which way do you think the team is currently leaning?
And I think that's gonna be one of the big questions for whatever the new GM comes in, because Saquon is like, the face of the Dave Gettleman era in a lot of ways, especially because a lot of the quotes he had at that time were, pushing back at all the criticism for picking running back that early. And you saw how good Saquon can be in the beginning, and injuries have kind of robbed him of a lot of that. I think my guess would be that they let him play out that contract next year, and if he, returns to the old form, then they'll be willing to pay him. If he doesn't, you let him walk. I would personally try and trade him if you can, see whatever kind of value you can get out of him. I don't know how much value he has right now because he does not look like himself. I mean, as you obviously know, the numbers are not good.
Mhm.
Um, everybody was celebrating that over 100 total yards this last game, and it was all in garbage time, pretty much. It's unfortunate to see because obviously, like at his best, like his rookie year is one of the best like rookie years ever, for at least in fantasy terms. So it's unfortunate, but he just looks like a shell of himself this year. He looks like he's trying to avoid contact at times. Doesn't have the same burst. Occasional pop out, and I think his skills as a receiver are maybe a little overblown because I think a lot of it was on checkdowns when he was a rookie with Eli there. Um, so it's a very interesting discussion. I'm very curious to see what the GM that comes in wants to do with him.
Now, let me throw one other question out there. I saw Saquon's quote. It was either earlier this week or maybe last week, where he said that he wants to retire a New York Jet. And obviously, you hear players say things like that all the time. But do you think that if it gets to the point where his contract expires, he would take more of a team friendly deal to stay in New York rather than just going out to another team?
No, I don't think. I think he's very conscious of like his brand, and I think he likes being a celebrity and things like that. I think being in a big market definitely appeals to him, and he has a lot of marketing and all that stuff off the field out here. But I also think he started to experience like criticism for the first time in his career this year, both in the media and the fan base. And I could definitely see him wanting to get a change of scenery. I don't know what that would look like or what kind of money he'd get on the free agent market, but I wouldn't put it past him to leave. I don't know. I think that's a thing. I think he likes it here and all that, and he wants to be a face of the franchise in New York. But if he gets through his 5 years and they haven't given him a new contract, I could see him taking that personally as well.
Yeah, maybe getting a fresh start somewhere else. So let's talk about another guy that I kind of see as maybe the other face of the Gettleman era, and that's Daniel Jones. Right now, he's got a pretty concerning neck injury. And there are some wild rumors out there. So I'm going to wait until there's something a little bit more concrete before I speculate on any of that. But right now, are the Giants preparing for him to return this year? Do they have any sort of timetable, or is it still kind of, just a big question mark?
It's a big question mark. I mean, I think it really is week to week. I don't think he's going to play the rest of the year. I don't have any optimism that he does, which is unfortunate because they needed these last like 5 games to evaluate him, and they're not going to get the chance to do that. But I mean, you don't mess around with a neck injury. It's like such a weird thing because we see him out of practice and he's still like doing stuff in practice and he looks good, but he hasn't been clear for contact, which obviously is a big deal. It's like every Monday he keeps like checking in with a new doctor and hasn't gotten there yet. So I just don't see them, especially when they're as out of it as they are, with 2 games left or whatever. Like, are they really going to bring him back out there? I don't know. I just don't see it playing out that way. So what you're going to get is Mike Lennon or Jake Fromm the rest of the way, and that's not good for any of their weapons either, because those guys, Mike Lennon can't really move around well, and everybody knows what he is at this point, and nobody knows what Jake Fromm is, but it could be pretty bad in theory because he was on
Right.
the Bills practice squad all year for a reason. So
And that's almost why I wonder why if he is medically cleared to play, if they want to bring him back, just because it does help them evaluate some of these guys like Kadarius Toney and Saquon Barkley as they're,
good
getting
point.
more
Yeah.
up to speed. But this has been a tough, tough year for injuries. I mean, you can blame signings and whatever you want, but I think injuries have really been the theme of the year for the Giants, and it's been pretty tough. But while we're still talking about Daniel Jones, I want to throw another quarterback out there. Russell Wilson came out and said that he would waive his no trade clause for the Giants. A very, very short list of the teams, but the Giants were on there. Is that something that you think the Giants will pursue this offseason, or is that just smoke right now?
Well, I would say it's probably just smoke. They have such a tough cap situation right now that in order to even get him in, they would have to, cut a bunch of guys and restructure a bunch of deals just to get 25, because I think his salary would be 25 million, just to get him under the salary cap. And then you wouldn't be able to make the offensive line better. And then is he really coming to a situation much better than Seattle? Like I get the New York part of it. I don't really get the Giants part of it with him.
Yeah.
But I could very much see like the Giants owner like getting tantalized at the idea of getting a guy like Russell Wilson. They have the draft assets to do it. They can theory could dangle Saquon in a deal. That Pete Carroll loves a running back. So I mean, I wouldn't say it's like a 0% chance, but I'd be pretty shocked if they were an actual contender for him.
That's a great point, talking about dangling Saquon out there. That's something I didn't even really think of, but this injury to Chris Carson looks like it's pretty serious. Rashad Penny's gone after this year. Alex Collins is on a one-year deal. I don't think Adrian Peterson is getting any more than that 1 week that he saw in Seattle. So that would be a pretty good way to offload some money. Another way to offload some money though would be Sterling Shepard. And I don't even want to say this because Sterling Shepard's one of the most tenured guys on the Giants. He's a fan favorite. I think everybody in New York really loves Sterling Shepard. But we've talked about the salary cap constraints a few times now. So with so much money being committed to Galladay, and with the need for offensive line and edge rushers, with them drafting Kadarius Toney in the first round, do you think that there's a pretty good chance that they exercise that out that they have in Shepard's contract this year?
And I would have said yes, but they were so strapped for cash this year that they had to restructure his contract. And that made it so if they cut him this offseason, they only save $4 million and they incur an $8 million dead cap penalty. Which, dead cap, that means it's money already paid or whatever. But you have to decide if you want, would you rather have that $8 million in your cap sheet or the $4 million that you can go and spend to get somebody that's probably not as good as Shepard? So I lean towards them keeping him. I wouldn't rule out them cutting him if they're desperate to clear some money. But their decision to restructure it was confusing at the time. I mean, they needed more money, I guess. But the problem with him, he's had such injury issues that it's hard to like you can't really rely on him for a full schedule. But I lean towards him being here next year, though. Again, I wouldn't be shocked if they cut him either.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I didn't realize that with the dead cap that they're going to be taking that much of a hit if they do cut him. So that's kind of something we see a lot in the NFL where they just keep pushing that money out, and then
Exactly.
it gets to the point where they want to offload him, and they're like, well, we can't at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm all too familiar with seeing a lot of Ryan Pace contracts that have gone that way. But let's talk about the other big wide receiver, Kenny Galladay, who was off to a slow start. And I think that you can attribute that slow start, or at least at the time, to injuries. He still had some lingering injuries from last season. But in recent weeks, it seems like the team is making a pretty concerted effort to get him the ball. We've seen his targets going up, but he's still struggling to produce. So just kind of walk me through what's the feel in the locker room right now regarding Galladay, because he is under contract through 2025 and there's a lot of money tied up there. Are they chalking this up to injury, or are they starting to get a little bit concerned?
I mean, I mean, his numbers are just bad. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet. I will say, I think a big part of it is I don't think they've been using him like in the way that his skills are down the sideline, 50-50 balls, things like that. And a lot of his targets have been like across the middle of the field and in
Hmm.
situations. He's not a guy that's going to create separation. So you need to be able to throw him those 50-50 balls, and they haven't even really tried them very much. So, I mean, I think he definitely deserves some responsibility. They're paying him to be a number one receiver, and he's not producing like it. But I do think they could use him better. Right? So it's a combination of the health stuff. He's been in and out of the lineup, as you mentioned, so he hasn't really been able to build chemistry. When he maybe even if he had felt he was finally building some with Daniel Jones every time he feels like that, either he gets hurt or Daniel's been out. So
Yep.
it's been a rough year. He hasn't lived up to his contract, and if it keeps going like this, it's going to wind up being one of the worst ones they've had. But the talent I think is there. It's just a matter of maybe getting him in the right spots.
And as soon as I saw the signing, I got excited because Daniel Jones has, for whatever you want to say about him, he's got a beautiful long ball. I mean, when he lets that thing rip, he can put it on a dime. And then that's what, like you said, Galladay is known for, those sideline 50-50 balls. So him having injuries throughout the offseason that he was still dealing with, and then Daniel Jones having his injury, I really do want to see what these two can look like after a full offseason of building some chemistry together. So just my opinion. I think keeping Daniel Jones shut down and then letting them have the offseason to kind of work through those problems is the best bet. But the last wide receiver I want to talk about here is Kadarius Toney. This kid has been electric. How are they looking at him right now? I mean, do they see him as a piece that they can completely build around, or is he somebody that's going to more likely take on a secondary role to Galladay?
Well, talent-wise, they definitely view him that way, but the guy's made of glass. I mean, he's missed a bunch of games this season. I think he's missed 4 in a row now or 3 in a row now, something like that. He's not gonna play this week, both because of COVID and he's still hurt. So, he had injury questions coming in. He had some immaturity questions coming in. He's kind of shown that too. So there's definitely like some concerns with him if he can, be a 16 or 17 games a year receiver. And I don't know that he can, but like you said, he's electric when he has the ball in his hands. Think he's still developing as a route runner, so a lot of his plays are yards after the catch, which is good. But I don't know if he's showing as much like down the field yet. But that Cowboys game you had, where he had 190 yards, is just so tantalizing. So I think you see that and you see the talent. You just hope that he can stay healthy.
So, I don't get to be plugged in with NFL teams. When you have a guy like this that has injury concerns, are there any steps that the team can take to kind of help, keep those down a little bit? Maybe some workouts during the week or anything like that, or maybe how they change his usage. If there's anything that they can do to try to, curb that, or is it just something that is baked into, Kadarius Tony's value, knowing that he could get injured at any time?
I'd say it's probably baked in, but I don't know. I guess there's ways you can train him up in the offseason and stuff like that. Part of his problem was he missed most of training camp, both with COVID and he had a hamstring thing. And training camps when you really build your body up and get it ready for the season, and he wasn't out there. So he pretty much played in week 1 after barely practicing. So I think so if he can get an actual full offseason where he's not missing all that time, then that should do wonders for him, I would think.
And I think that's why people got so excited about Kadarius Toney, because typically with rookies, you see them come in and develop throughout the season. And his first game, he just came in and just absolutely blew it up, and it was exciting to see. But the last wide receiver I want to talk about here is Kadarius Toney. This kid has been electric. How are they looking at him right now? I mean, do they see him as a piece that they can completely build around, or is he somebody that's going to more likely take on a secondary role to Galladay?
Well, talent-wise, they definitely view him that way, but the guy's made of glass. I mean, he's missed a bunch of games this season. I think he's missed 4 in a row now or 3 in a row now, something like that. He's not going to play this week, both because of COVID and he's still hurt. So he had injury questions coming in. He had some immaturity questions coming in. He's kind of shown that too. So there's definitely like some concerns with him if he can, be a 16 or 17 games a year receiver. And I don't know that he can, but like you said, he's electric when he has the ball in his hands. Think he's still developing as a route runner, so a lot of his plays are yards after the catch, which is good. But I don't know if he's showing as much like down the field yet. But that Cowboys game you had, where he had 190 yards, is just so tantalizing. So I think you see that and you see the talent. You just hope that he can stay healthy.
So, I don't get to be plugged in with NFL teams. When you have a guy like this that has injury concerns, are there any steps that the team can take to kind of help, keep those down a little bit? Maybe some workouts during the week or anything like that, or maybe how they change his usage. If there's anything that they can do to try to, curb that, or is it just something that is baked into, Kadarius Tony's value, knowing that he could get injured at any time?
I'd say it's probably baked in, but I don't know. I guess there's ways you can train him up in the offseason and stuff like that. Part of his problem was he missed most of training camp, both with COVID and he had a hamstring thing. And training camps when you really build your body up and get it ready for the season, and he wasn't out there. So he pretty much played in week 1 after barely practicing. So I think so if he can get an actual full offseason where he's not missing all that time, then that should do wonders for him, I would think.
And I think that's why people got so excited about Kadarius Toney, because typically with rookies, you see them come in and develop throughout the season. And his first game, he just came in and just absolutely blew it up, and it was exciting to see.